In Baudrillard's fable, reality exists only as rotting shreds that are attached to the map. And this is the state of our age, according to Baudrillard, that the model itself has primacy for us. The real has become irrelevant, if undefinable, and clings only as vestiges. And he's coined the phrase, the desert of the real, to describe the state of our age.
This video might be a bit abstract for some, but it strikes me as being the case that both my video on the perceived context that Psi is representing, as well as my subsequent video on the underlying anxieties that Psi is tapping into within the contemporary evangelical mind, are aspects of a single underlying value structure. And there is a value structure.
Brothers and sisters, unbelievers are fools. Not in the name-calling sense. Don't go around calling them fools, but it's a description of their unwillingness to reason, their willful suppression of the truth. It's a moral claim.
The hope here is to unpack that value structure, and it's through that lens to understand who Psi is. I repeat from the introduction that the Psi that I'm talking about is not the flesh and blood man, but rather the picture of the man that is produced as an effect of the performance of the text. There are basically two core values here that form the actual foundation upon which this framework sits, and I don't think that we can understand the rise of presuppositionalism without confronting them. The values are as clear as day, and I shouldn't even need to play clips, but I will anyway. They are certainty and authority.
We've given up biblical authority. But we've given up biblical authority. Oh, biblical authority. You see, in church we say that God certainly exists. When you tell them that God is not certain, everyone knows that God certainly exists. Is how certain you are that God exists. So how certain I am that God exists. How are you so certain that God exists? By the certainty of God. They're not certain. If you're not certain, I'm just not certain she exists. They know that God certainly exists. If you have certainty, and certain of what we do not see. Certainty, you may know the certainty, with certainty that I came from you. We're certain about certainty. There is no certainty. Are you certain about that? Certainty is certain God before they were certain.
I wanted to cut in more authority, but that mainly takes place later in the speech, and honestly, I just couldn't watch anymore. These values form the centerpiece of the quote-unquote worldview that Psi is representing. The question here is the Nietzschean one. Why are these concepts valuable to Psi? They strike me as not being terribly Christian values. Think about certainty. Isn't it the case that the history of thought begins with a critique of certainty? The core of the Socratic method is the maxim, I know that I know nothing. This is restated by Montaigne as, the only thing that is certain is that nothing is certain. Psi actually goes out of his way to critique this notion in his speech.
You know, in one of my debates, my atheistic opponent said to me, there is no certainty. He said, there is no certainty. You know what I said to him? You certain about that? Denying certainty is self-refuting. It's foolishness.
What he fails to recognize here is that within the philosophical tradition, this statement is not an epistemic claim. It's a value judgment. Another way of saying uncertainty is better than certainty. Psi seems to think that this notion is somehow contrary to Christianity, which is interesting to me, given Nietzsche's famous remark, Christianity is Platonism for the people. This sentiment can't be reduced solely to Nietzsche, however. And the fact is, the relationship between Christianity and Platonism is complex, but at the very least it is the case that Christianity received its earliest full philosophical articulation in figures like St. Augustine of Hippo and Origen of Alexandria, who are both deeply indebted to Platonism. So in what world does one have to be living in to suggest that the affirmation of the central claim of Socrates is unchristian? The other side of the coin here is authority. To give a peek behind the curtain, when I was cutting these videos together, I've heard the word authority so many times that I want to stab my eyes out. Sai cites a few passages in the Bible that use the word authority, but the traditional Christian relationship to authority, as a value, is ambiguous at best. This is, after all, the slave religion, wherein the ultimate authority was crucified on a day that we call Good Friday. The Christian tradition has always reserved the idea of authority for God, but to claim that the Christian tradition encourages its followers to actually be authoritative strikes me as an oversimplification at best, and certainly doesn't belong anywhere near the dead center of Christianity. The fact is, these aren't central Christian values, but rather values that are being read into the Bible by Sai. The obvious question becomes, why? Where does this value system come from? Well, I have a confession. I left out a part of my analysis on context, as well as a part of my thinking on Christian anxiety, so that I could complete them in the form of this hypothesis. You'll forgive me the length of the following clip, I'm sure, but after hearing so much from Sai, I think it'll be nice to hear some real thought at work. The following clip is from Rick Roderick's lecture on Baudrillard. Baudrillard was a radical postmodern thinker whose work is most famous for deeply influencing The Matrix. I'm sure that if plenty of my subscribers picked up a book of his, they'd think he's an obscurantist nutjob, but whatever you think of him, this particular idea strikes me as being profoundly true.
Because what were these concepts anyway? Like man and world, except concepts by which the world was regulated, policed, mapped, and controlled. All four of which are becoming more and more difficult to do under this situation of rapidly increasing complexity, which I've mentioned many times, and I mean system complexity at every level. Rapid increase in information technologies, and a sense you get is one that resembles Vertigo. How many of you have seen Vertigo, the great Alfred Hitchcock movie? You know, that sort of sickly sense that you're twisting above sort of abysmally too much of something. This seems to me a fine sort of mood characterization for the postmodern trajectory. A sense of vertigo before all this information. So you want the truth about the truth about the truth and all the way down, interminably. Vertigo, that's the sense you get looking down that chain of bizarre stories.
Doesn't it strike you that Sai's value system is an essentially perfect ideological reaction to this broader context? In a world of ever-increasing complexity and propagation of information, we experience a form of radical vertigo. This vertigo is dealt with through the construction of a value system that takes authority and certainty as its core axioms. It's a way of coping with an emphatically unique situation within a rapidly changing world. The implications of this insight, qua fundamentalism in general, are well beyond the scope of this video, but it allows us to understand who Sai is actually presenting himself to be. Remember all those clips in the last couple of videos about how you don't need to be a genius to defend the faith? You just need the authority of Scripture? Doesn't this larger horizon recast those statements beyond the immediate moment of the speech itself? Sai is positing himself not only as one who can alleviate your anxieties, but as an authoritative and certain voice articulating a way out of this genuinely unnerving socio-existential condition.
And I think that the way people deal with this is interesting. They deal with it as a form of complexity, a word I've used probably too many times. It makes them people caught in this cusp between an old world and an old paradigm that is dying, and a new one that it cannot really yet be born. And we find ourselves in that space. And it draws us to people like Ross Perot who say, it's just that simple. It's just that simple. It's just that simple. That's the most powerful political rhetoric in a world with a postmodern projection. God, how we would love it if someone could tell us anything was just that simple.
We as atheists sit back and watch these presuppositional arguments and wonder how anybody could possibly buy into it, and with such fervor. But given everything that I've sketched out, doesn't that demeanor make perfect sense? The most damaging critique that I think can possibly be leveraged against presuppositional apologetics is that at its core, it's simply an assertion of a value-laden, pathological resentment dressed up in the guise of Christianity. The real problem here is that the issues that I've presented here demand a real, thoughtful conversation. And that conversation has nothing to do with simulism, the veracity of sense data, or non-contradiction.